Thanks a lot, Tom. Thanks for the invitation as well. And what I wanted to do was just provide perhaps maybe another point of view on the claudication issue and trying to match up some of the technologies we deal with and some of the lesions that we have to face. So the probability of restenosis, as we know from our own unfortunate experiences, is that it peaks around 6 months for angioplasty. This is for stenting, around 12 months. And, if we could change that curve, we could change a lot about what we could offer to patients. So I would just say in the last 7 years, it's been about 7.5 years since the first SFA stent approved by the FDA became, sort of on label. And I think over these past 7 years that I can say we can cross almost every lesion in the SFA and popliteal. There's mounting randomized controlled trial data with PTA stents, stent grafts, drug-coated balloons, and drug-eluting stents. And in my opinion, the era of drug delivery has arrived. And I don't think of, or maybe we all won't think of angioplasty balloons or stents as revascularization devices. We might be thinking of them going forward as drug delivery devices. But I also think there are a lot of challenges, and some of those have already been highlighted by Tom and Pat. But long lesions and calcification are still a problem. We still need multi-year results to bolster our conclusions. We are going to need more technology, and I agree with what Mark said about the fact that we may not have the right drug in this so-called era of drug delivery. And we also have to manage this crazy array of choices that we have. And really, the bankroll is not unlimited, so how are we going to do that? So this is just to say, some of the things that we have now that we really didn't have so well before. We've got these CTO wires and catheters, re-entry devices, and retrograde access, which makes it so that I walk away unable to cross very, very uncommonly now. It used to be 10-20% of the cases 5 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, it was even more than that. And now it's I would say, rare. So we've gotten good at crossing, but we're not so good at keeping these channels open. So these are just some of the stent studies that have been done for FDA approval in the United States, and you can see where the patency rates range from the mid-60s to the mid-80s. The first one being the Life stent approved in 2009. And if you kind of match that data up, and you've already seen, and I'm sure you're familiar with the concept of increasing length, or let's say progressive task categorization leads to diminished results. But it seems like the patients that had stents definitely did better than the patients with PTA. But this is always our complaint. This is our concern that, geez, how many task A and B lesions do we have? We're really more concerned with the longer lesions. So there probably is some reason why angioplasty alone fares poorly, and one of those is post-PTA dissections, which negatively impact patency. And this was a prospective randomized trial. This was the first shot across the bow in the drug-coated balloon revolution. This was in the New England Journal of Thunder trial. And what this did was kind of broke down the groups, and what they found was that the restenosis rate after angioplasty was higher after a mild dissection than after no dissection, and even higher after a severe dissection, and that the likelihood of requiring repeat revascularization was also correlated with that. So it makes sense that if we leave dissections behind, the artery may not be in good shape. And this is a more recently presented study that's in press. This comes from Japan, and what they did was they looked at the post-angioplasty dissection, and you can see 60% of them had a 0, A or B in terms of severity, and 40% had a C to an F. And to be fair, they stented most of the patients, and you can see that the rate of stenting increased as this severity increased, but plenty of patients went with balloon alone, and this is what they found, that if you had either no dissection or a very mild one and it didn't get treated, that you had a patency rate and a TLR rate that was substantially better than those with severe dissections. So it makes sense to put stents in my opinion, and we've consistently gotten better data with stents than we did with angioplasty alone. But now we have new problems, stent fracture and ISR, In-stent restenosis, honestly, is a beast I wish I had never met. And if the stent goes on to occlusion, the secondary patency or the long-term results of almost anything you do appears to be not very good. Your risk of embolization goes up, and those problems seem to increase. So the concept then of a covered stent or stent graft makes a lot of sense. Perhaps you could obviate the likelihood of in-stent restenosis. So these are the stent graft trials, the Viper, Vibrant, and Viastar, which compared standard stents with stent grafts. And it seemed to really extend the curve that you would, the line, let's say, that you would expect with stents alone. And then comes paclitaxel, and this comes from a presentation from Renu Vermani from Charing Cross last year, where she showed how the paclitaxel crystals were actually incorporated into the wall of the artery, and this allows the sustained release. You know, this slide really helped me a lot because this concept that you could just blow up a balloon once for a couple minutes and the effect would still be there at a much, much, much later time was something that's very counterintuitive to me. And so here's the two prospective randomized trials in the U.S. that led to approval of two different devices, the IMPACT and the Levant studies. But again, these were with limited lesion lengths, 8.9 centimeters and 6.3 centimeters. Nevertheless, if you add these two randomized trials to the curve, what you see is that you're getting stent-like results, but without an implant, which in my opinion is progress, absolutely. So this concept of the task C or better, task D lesion is one that lives on with us. So what are we going to do about this? We haven't yet solved it. Well, I wanted to just bring to your attention some recent publications looking at long lesions. This one comes from Italy. Mean lesion length 25 centimeters, 1 year patency 83.2%. So now we're getting in the into the range of prosthetic PTFE fem-pop, maybe even into the vein range, depending. Here's another study, task C and D lesions, mean lesion length 24 centimeters, 1 year patency 79%, 2 years 53.7. So, and this is again a registry style, it's not a randomized controlled trial, but these types of data are starting to accumulate. And this is yet another, this is not yet published, but this comes from a global registry, and these patients were adjudicated very carefully with core lab analysis and such. And again, looking at long lesions, mean length 26 centimeters, and the patency then was around 90%. And with the lengthening of the lesion or moving from stenosis to occlusion, you can also see a fairly appreciable stent rate of 40 to 50% in that group. So stents are not going away in this construct. This is the Zilverpass trial, not yet published. This is a European trial, but recently preliminary results presented, and looking at Zilver PTX versus FemPop for long lesions, again, mean lesion length 25 centimeters. So the last several studies I've showed you, these are the lesions that we've been complaining about for years that don't work with endo and that we don't believe we have an answer to other than bypass, and yet these data seem to be accumulating on a regular basis. This is IMPACT drug-coated balloon versus drug-eluting stent, again for relatively long lesions, mean length 19 centimeters. So it's going to take time for this information to fully percolate, but it does actually kind of populate our diagram a little bit better. I just wanted to say I didn't spend a lot of time on woven nitinol, which is right here. This is the best data we have for that comes from the Superb study. It appears to be as good as the other stents or maybe better. And also the atherectomy is another area I didn't spend a lot of time. This is the best data we have, comes from Definitive LE. So again, it's stent-like data without an implant. But it doesn't appear to be sort of a quantum leap or anything like that. And yet here's our drug-coated balloon and DES data for task C and D lesions. And you can see how now, well, maybe that downward sloping line actually, it may change direction on the basis of this sort of new era of drug delivery, if you will, and how it will affect our management of these long lesions. And of course, we really need to know beyond a year, especially if we're dealing with claudicators. Ideally, we need several years. And those are starting to pop up. We know that Zilver has 5-year data. The IMPACT drug-coated balloon study now is the 3-year manuscript is in press right now. And there's also some data from Europe out to 3 years looking at DCB versus bare metal stents. We have a continued problem with calcification. Probably you've seen this slide. I can't say that we have the right way to even classify calcification, let alone manage it. But there is this impression that we have decreased patency with increasing calcification. And atherectomy may solve that, but it may not. I mean, I think in a way this is sort of still in its infancy. There is definitive AR that compared drug-coated balloon versus directional atherectomy plus drug-coated balloon. And you can see that in some of the areas we're worried about, like patients with severe calcium or patients with, in this case, longer than 10 centimeters, certainly longer lesions we're worried about, it appeared that debulking with atherectomy to do vessel prep with that was better than just going ahead with drug-coated balloon. I think time will tell. It's going to be a while, in my opinion, before we know whether atherectomy gives any advantage. My sense is that a lot of what's happening in atherectomy is sort of waiting for further justification, and combined with DCB may do it. So I think you can see it's a work in progress. It's the beginning of what I would say is a drug delivery era, that we have multiple competing technologies. We still have knowledge gaps. The task C and D, though, is starting to fill in, and I'm optimistic about that. We have now a couple of trials that have done direct device comparisons, which we haven't had in the past. We've got the Tigris study that compared the Tigris stent from Gore versus Life stent, and now also initiating the Imperial study. This is Boston Scientific study looking at their new drug-eluting stent, also with paclitaxel versus the Zilver in a head-to-head comparison. So a couple of just added words, and one is that my sense is that when we talk about task A through D, we're really talking about lesion length, and that when you throw in things like common femoral artery involvement, or maybe extensive popliteal involvement, and or redos, that usually or frequently we end up with some kind of a hybrid or a combination of devices, and so I didn't really go into that. And mostly we talk about lesion length when we're talking about task classification. And my sense is that with task A and B, we're going to move away now from PTA plus selective stent to predilation with balloon or some type of vessel preparation tool. And if it looks good, the patient's going to get a drug-coated balloon. And if it looks bad, they're probably going to get a bare metal stent, because I don't think you can justify the cost of a DES for a short lesion, because we know stents work really well for short lesions. For task C, where we've been this past few years, primary stent or stent graft, I think we're going to go again to a situation of predilation followed by, probably in most patients, DCB plus spot treatment. If DES get good enough, and in my opinion they're not quite there, then that would be competitive. And then with task D in my practice, I think we're moving away from medical management in the high-risk patients, bypassing good-risk patients for those patients with the endless, the very, very long lesions. I think we're going to go to something else that involves drug. And again, I think it's going to be DCB plus spot treatment versus a full lineup of DES, again, depending on the technology development in DES. And then lastly, on this issue of managing new technology, I think it's worth just a couple of minutes or a couple of words on this. And that is, where I live, you can't actually get a FedEx package overnight. It actually takes 2 days. And we're further south than the furthest northerly point in the United States, which is Prudhoe Bay. And we're farther from any major airline hub than any place in the United States. And so what that means is that whatever we have on hand is what we have to use. And I think, and the reason why I'm mentioning this is because even though we're small, we're part of a larger organization, and that's true for a lot of us. And so you got to use that organization to the extent that you can to help you with filtering out new technologies possibly. And this is just in my neck of the woods. Issues about closure devices, robotics, and lap bands are the kind of thing that go to the new technology committee. We also have a national product council that does contracting basically for to limit the crazy number of array of different things. And then if you want something outside of that, you got to say why, which I think is reasonable. And then lastly, we do meet as a team with everybody in the OR a minimum of once a month. And during that time, it's amazing how much money we end up saving by focusing in on products that either weren't used, were about to expire, or talking over new things that we want and making sure that we're in full agreement before we order anything new. To have one person just go off and start a new project all by their lonesome, it just doesn't make financial sense right now. And so we typically do those things as a group and make sure everybody's involved. So to conclude, I think we can cross most lesions. We're still struggling to keep them open in the worst disease morphology, but I also think we're really moving away from an implant-based approach and toward a drug delivery approach. There's a lot of data accumulating, and I showed you some of it, and I think it's going to be really exciting in the next 5 years. We're probably where coronaries were in about 2001 or 2. We finally got some reasonable data being produced, and yet challenges remain. So thank you very much.